This story is based on real events, shared by those who lived them.
I always believed the road teaches you two things: how to say goodbye and how to keep moving afterward. But I never thought the road would one day test me with both on the same person. We met when I was 20 to a bus in southern Spain, a heatwave making the air feel heavy, and one empty seat beside me. That seat is how I met Alex. He asked if it was free. I nodded and for the next 4 hours, we didn't say a word. But sometimes silence is enough to start something. I remember thinking, we're both either running away from something or chasing it. When the bus stopped in a small coastal town, we stepped out, stretched, and he finally spoke. Are you traveling alone? Yeah. Well, you're not anymore. He said it casually, like he was stating the weather. But something in his tone made it feel like a promise. By sunset, we decided to travel together for a few days. We shared cheap meals, split hostel costs, and talked like we had known each other for years. Funny thing is, I still don't know what made us trust each other so fast. Maybe it was the fact that neither of us had anywhere else to be. Maybe it was because the road makes strangers feel like familiar places. Or maybe we were already looking for each other before we ever met. We didn't have a plan, just a map, a cheap tent, and two different reasons to keep moving. He carried a small camera with a cracked screen. I carried a notebook with dog-eared pages. He liked capturing things before they disappeared. I liked writing things before I forgot them. So together, we remembered things in different ways. That's how our friendship worked, two versions of the same days. We slept on beaches, hitchhiked in passing trucks, and spent whole nights talking about fear, love, regret, and time. He never talked about his family. I never asked. We both had places we refused to mention. Some things don't need to be said to be understood. One night, while watching the stars, he said calmly, people think the road takes you somewhere. But maybe it just shows you what you were already carrying. I wrote that sentence down. It felt like one of those things you should never forget. By the third week, something in him shifted. He became distant. Still present, but as if part of him started walking ahead of us. Like his mind was always on the next town, or the next problem. He talked more about money and less about dreams. He stopped taking pictures. He slept less, ate less, smiled less. I asked if he was okay. He said, I don't think I'm meant for long journeys. I answered, but you've been doing this for months. He shrugged. That's different. I haven't been staying anywhere. It hit me quietly. For him, traveling wasn't an adventure. It was not living disguised as living. That was when I realized the road doesn't fix people. It just makes broken parts louder. We were waiting at a bus station in Granada. A few people, faded signs, pigeons walking between luggage wheels. He was oddly calm. I asked where he was headed next. He just said, somewhere without reminders. The bus arrived. Doors opened. He stood up slowly and said, if I stay, I'll start depending on something. I'd rather keep moving before I get used to anything again. I asked if we would meet again. He smiled, but his eyes didn't. We don't meet people twice. We just meet new versions of them. Then he boarded the bus, didn't look back, didn't wave, and that was it. The friend I didn't mean to find, and wasn't ready to lose. After Alex left, I kept traveling, not because I wanted to, but because staying still felt like telling the world that his absence changed me. I went to other countries, met other travelers, shared other hostels, trains, and buses, but none of them became a friend of the road the way he did. Others talked about destinations. He talked about reasons, others talked about comfort. He talked about escape. That was when I understood. There are travelers, and there are runners. And maybe we were both. One night, in Lisbon, a traveler asked me, how long have you been on the road? I didn't know what to say. Days and months had stopped meaning anything. I just answered the only thing that felt true. Since someone left the bus, in the following years, I met hundreds of people. Some stayed for hours, others for weeks. Each one taught me something. A French hiker taught me that freedom still needs direction. A Romanian artist taught me that life doesn't wait for inspiration. An old woman in northern Italy told me, if you keep moving, pain will follow too. But at least it has to run to catch you. I filled notebooks, I took pictures, I slept on more couches than beds. But every story, every sunset, every road, had a place where his absence appeared. He was gone. But somehow, he was still traveling with me. 4 years later, I was in Croatia, a small seaside town where fishermen woke before the sun and tourists arrived after it. I found a cheap hostel on a hill. Same kind of place where we used to stay, same smell of salt and detergent, same creaking bunk beds. They put me in a shared room. 4 beds, 2 occupied already. I didn't ask names, didn't introduce myself. Just unpacked, the same way I had done 100 times before, but that night, something happened. The room was dark, only street lights flickering through blinds. One of the guys asked, "Have you been traveling long?" I shrugged, too long to remember when it started. Then he said a name I hadn't heard in years. "Yeah, I met a guy once, sounded kind of like you. I think his name was Alex." My breath stopped. Alex. 4 years, 5 countries, dozens of towns. And someone said his name, as if he had just stepped out of the room. I asked, "Alex what?" The traveler shook his head. Never gave a last name, just said, "Some friendships don't need one." My hands were trembling, not because I was afraid, but because part of me suddenly believed he was close. Maybe he was, maybe he wasn't, but for the first time since he left, I didn't feel alone anymore. The next day, I started asking around. Not desperately, not like I needed closure, but like someone who finally realized that the road doesn't only take, it sometimes returns. A bartender remembered him. A train conductor said he might have seen him. A hostel owner said he looked familiar. They all said the same thing: if you're looking for him, you might be closer than you think. And that was all I needed. I packed my bag, picked a direction, started walking, not to run this time, but maybe to arrive. I didn't have an address, I didn't have a clue, but I had something I hadn't felt in years, a direction. So I followed it. I traveled across Croatia, then Slovenia, then Austria. I asked quietly in hostels, bus stations, guest houses. I described him only in pieces, a traveler with a cracked camera. He doesn't take pictures anymore. He says he hasn't stayed anywhere long enough to call it a memory. Some people shrugged, some were curious, but a few paused just a little too long before answering, and those pauses kept me moving. One hostel owner said she saw someone like him a year ago. A bartender remembered a sentence he'd said: "I don't need a drink, just a place where the noise isn't louder than my thoughts." A train worker remembered his silence more than his face. An old woman asked if he was the kind of traveler who never gave a last name. I told her yes. She just nodded, slowly. Sometimes silence is confirmation. After 2 months of searching, I realized I was doing the same thing he used to do. Not planning destinations, just marking places I didn't stay. I started drawing a map in my notebook. Not of countries, not of cities, but of questions. Did he come here? Why do I still care? Is this journey about him? Or me? If I find him, then what? Until one day, I wrote something new. I haven't been searching for him. I've been searching for who I was when we met. And suddenly, things became clear. I bought one ticket, only one, back to the country where we first traveled together, Spain. I landed in Malaga on a cold morning. Same bus station, same faded signs, same smell of diesel and sea salt. I walked to the coast, not to find him, but to accept that maybe he was gone. But when the tide reached my shoes, I whispered his name anyway, Alex, not loud, just enough to admit that part of me never stopped walking with him. And that's when I felt it. Not wind, not fear, a presence behind me. I turned slowly. A man stood a few steps away, looking at me with the same expression he had when we left the bus years ago. He was older, thinner, different, but it was him. He held a camera, still cracked, but this time he was using it. He took a photo of me, lowered the camera, then smiled like no time had passed. "I thought you might come back one day." That was all he said, but that was enough. We didn't hug, we didn't cry. We just sat on the sand and watched the ocean, like we had done before, not as strangers, not as travelers, but as two versions of ourselves that finally arrived at the same moment in time. We stayed in that town for a few days, not as travelers and not as friends trying to make up for lost time. We simply existed in the same place again. It was enough. We didn't wake up early. We didn't plan routes. We just walked, ate, sat, watched, listened. Sometimes we talked for hours, sometimes we didn't talk at all. That felt like real friendship, because I didn't feel pressure to be interesting. He didn't feel pressure to explain why he left. We were finally in a space where silence didn't demand answers. One evening, we watched the sky turn purple at the edge of the sea. He said quietly, "Do you think we became better people?" I thought about it. About the roads, hostels, cold beds, empty nights. About the notebook I'd filled with questions instead of plans. And I said, I don't know if we became better, but I think we became more real. He nodded with a sad smile. That's what I was afraid of. That being real might cost too much. I looked at him, lines around his eyes, thinner shoulders, same calm voice, same heavy sentences. He saw the changes in me too. And somehow, that felt like closure, not because we were done, but because we had seen each other from both sides of the journey. One night, we walked past a small alley where streetlights were flickering. He stopped, just stood there. I asked, "What is it?" He said nothing. He didn't move, didn't blink, just breathed slowly, deliberately, like someone trying to stay inside the same second longer than time allowed. Then he whispered, "I stood here once. On the day I thought of ending my journey, I didn't answer. I couldn't. The silence felt sacred. Finally, he said. But then I remembered you, and I thought, someone out there still expects me to exist." He kept walking, and that was when I understood something important. Even when we lost each other on the road, we were still traveling with a version of each other, somewhere inside. One afternoon, we found a train station on top of a hill. Just a small wooden bench, schedules written in chalk. No one else around. We sat under the shade. It felt like déjà vu, he said. If I asked you to travel with me again, would you? The question surprised me more than anything. I didn't answer immediately. After a few minutes, I said, maybe the point is, we don't need the road to stay friends anymore. He blinked, slowly, like he was absorbing the sentence. Then he smiled softly. Maybe that means we finally arrived. We didn't hug. We didn't make promises. We just stayed in that moment. Because some friendships don't need plans. They just need presence. We stayed one last evening in that small seaside town, not because we planned it that way, but because sometimes the road chooses the right place for goodbye. Long before we do, it rained lightly, not enough to run. Just enough to make every streetlight blur like memory. We found a late-night cafe, one table near the window. No music. Just rain on glass and the hum of a refrigerator in the back. He sat across from me, slowly stirring the coffee he wouldn't drink. After a while, he said, "Do you think we met again? Because we were meant to travel together again." I shook my head. No, I think we met again. So we'd learn how to travel apart, without losing each other this time. He took a deep breath, the kind people take before standing up or saying something true. Then he nodded. Just once. That feels right. He didn't smile. But his face softened, like pain that finally admits it's tired. Before leaving the cafe, he looked at his old cracked camera. One day, he said, I thought about taking a picture of us. But I didn't, because I was afraid that if I remembered you wrong, I wouldn't know who I became after you were gone. I said quietly, you could take one now. He looked at me for a long time, not deciding, remembering. Then he raised the camera. And before taking the photo, he said, this time, if I change, I'll let the picture remind me who helped me do it. Click, a single, small sound. But it felt like a gentle door closing on an old room. He smiled. The first real smile I'd seen since the day we met on that bus, years ago. We walked back toward the hostel, quiet but at peace. At the corner of the street, standing under a flickering streetlight. We both knew we wouldn't stay another day. I asked, do we say goodbye here? He said, no. We just say, take care of the road you choose next. Then he opened his arms, just once, and I hugged him, not like a traveler saying goodbye, but like a friend finally arriving. He whispered, you don't lose people on the road, you meet them in the pieces of yourself you didn't know yet. He stepped back, looked at me one last time, then walked into the rain. no bag, no map, still traveling. When I entered my room that night, I didn't unpack. I didn't plan my next destination. I didn't even check the weather for tomorrow. I just sat at the desk, opened the notebook where I had written hundreds of miles in words, and I added one last line. Some friends never leave us, they simply walk ahead. To make sure we won't get lost when we arrive, I closed the notebook, not because the story was over, but because some friendships don't need to be written to stay real. I slept peacefully for the first time in years. And when I woke up, I chose a direction. But this time, it wasn't running, it was living. I never found Alex again. Not in hostels, not in bus stations, not in crowded cities, not in quiet towns. But sometimes, when I walk into a new place, I feel something familiar in the air, like someone has already been there and cleared the way a little, so I wouldn't be afraid to enter. That's why I still travel. Not to escape anything, not to chase anything, but to honor the people who made the road feel safe when I didn't know where I belonged. Because friendship isn't always walking beside someone. Sometimes it's trusting that they're still somewhere on the road, waiting to meet you in a different version of yourself, and that is the only ending I ever needed.